Beneath the surface of forgotten maps lies a town that officially never existed. No survivors. No graves. Just silence, scorched earth, and a single twisted tree. What secret was so terrible, so vital, that the Nazis buried it with fire? This isn't just a story of rockets and war, it's a descent into a place where science and death were forged underground. And once you hear what happened in Waldberg, you may wish you hadn't. The North Atlantic was a graveyard in 1942. Icy winds cut across the steel hulls of Allied ships, and beneath the waves lurked the silent menace of Germany's U-boats. Operation Helix was to be a turning point, an experimental convoy carrying state-of-the-art radar arrays and Soviet liaison officers to Murmansk, aimed at cementing Allied technological superiority and securing the Eastern Front with Stalin's forces. It never arrived. Convoy HX 417 was small but classified as high priority. The lead vessel, HMS Ardent, was a modified destroyer fitted with prototype counter-U-boat sonar, its existence known only to a handful of high-ranking officers within the British Admiralty. Behind it, 5 cargo vessels carried radar components, encrypted blueprints, and crates marked only with red Soviet stars. Guarding the rear, a single Canadian corvette, Shorebird, commanded by Lieutenant Henry McIntyre, was tasked with ensuring that nothing slipped through the convoy's fragile shield. Weather reports showed a storm front moving in, but orders from Whitehall were clear. Speed was essential. The cargo had to reach Murmansk before the Germans could begin a new offensive near Leningrad. The convoy steamed into the heart of the North Atlantic, cutting radio contact to reduce exposure to German direction finders. Unbeknownst to the Allies, their every movement was being tracked. Captain Lieutenant Jørgen Nystrom, commander of U-553, was a rarity, a Norwegian who had defected to Germany in 1940, convinced that Hitler's Europe was the future. A naval prodigy and fanatically precise, Nystrom had begun coordinating his own version of the Wolfpack tactic, using 3 U-boats, not just to hunt, but to shadow convoys silently for days before striking. Through intercepted Soviet transmissions and traitorous leaks from a captured resistance cell in Copenhagen, he learned of Operation Helix's route. For 5 days, HX 417 was followed from a distance, never knowing. Then, in the pitch-black early hours of February 11, 1942, the first torpedo struck. Ardent's hull shattered just below the waterline. A second torpedo hit moments later, splitting the deck and igniting the fuel stores. Within minutes, the radar array and the engineers guarding it were gone, swallowed by the cold. The surviving cargo ships scattered, but the Wolfpack was ruthless. U-553, joined by U-210 and U-664, picked them off one by one, exploiting the storm to stay hidden. Shorebird, outgunned and outnumbered, fired flares into the howling wind and launched a desperate counterattack, sinking U-210 in a close-range depth charge run. But it was too late. The final transmission from Shorebird was a burst of Morse code, half corrupted by static. All lost. They knew. Betrayed. Then silence. The Admiralty launched a search, but recovery was impossible. Debris scattered across 100 miles, oil slicks burning briefly on icy waters. Officially, HX 417 had gone missing during hostile weather conditions. The technology on board. Listed as experimental components lost in testing. The names of the engineers and Soviet liaisons were quietly erased from deployment records. It might have stayed that way, had it not been for a chance discovery decades later. In 1991, a British trawler operating near the supposed wreck site snagged something heavy. Divers found a decaying crate wrapped in canvas, marked with both British and Soviet military symbols. Inside, pieces of broken radar equipment, partially legible blueprints in Russian, and a rusted tin canister containing undeveloped photographic film. An investigation was opened by the Ministry of Defense, and the film was rushed to a restoration lab. The grainy images that emerged were astonishing. Photographs of the Ardent's interior, showing strange cylindrical devices labeled Hedgehog Mk.2, an experimental forward-throwing anti-submarine weapon. Another showed 2 men standing before a chalkboard covered in complex frequency modulation equations. One wore a Soviet naval officer's coat, the other, a Royal Navy uniform. The photos reignited speculation about the convoy's true nature. Historians combed through old naval logs, eventually connecting HX 417 with unusual movements at Bletchley Park just days before its departure. Records showed a spike in decrypted Enigma traffic concerning Project H and references to targeted denial of Allied frequencies. But the most damning piece of evidence came from an overlooked memo written by Alan Turing himself, discovered in the archives at King's College. The memo, addressed to a liaison at the Admiralty, read, "If Helix falls, we may assume they have penetrated the cipher network deeper than anticipated. Contingency: full recalibration of radar harmonics across North Atlantic sectors." Which meant Turing had known. The codebreakers had suspected a breach but lacked time to confirm or stop the convoy. In a televised BBC documentary aired in 2004, a surviving crewman from Shorebird, by then 85 and near death, agreed to speak. His name was Harold Kinney, a radio operator. His recollection was haunting. "We were blind," Kinney rasped. "They were waiting. Not hunting. Waiting. I saw lights in the water. Green. Not ours. The first ship blew up like a firework. And then I remember the sea, burning, and the screams. No stars that night. Just black and fire." His interview was cut short by coughing fits. He died weeks later. To this day, no official apology has been made. Operation Helix remains one of the most classified failed missions of the war, its existence acknowledged only in footnotes and speculative literature. Yet its legacy is profound. Following its loss, Allied naval radar was overhauled, encryption protocols at Bletchley Park were upgraded, and Soviet-American intelligence cooperation was re-evaluated with suspicion that would echo into the Cold War. As for U-553, it vanished in April 1942. Some say it was sunk by a rogue wave. Others believe it was tracked by radar harmonic anomalies, ironically the very technology it had helped destroy. The North Atlantic holds its secrets well. But once in a while, the sea gives up a piece of history, a fragment, a whisper. Enough to remind us that war is not only what is remembered, but also what is deliberately forgotten. In 1996, renovation workers chipping away at the basement of an old tenement in Lviv, Ukraine, discovered a sealed brick wall. Behind it, buried beneath dust and debris, was a wooden cabinet wrapped in waxed canvas and string. Inside were 47 wax cylinder recordings, 2 rusted revolvers, and a journal wrapped in linen, its pages yellowed but still legible. What they had uncovered were the lost voices of one of the most elusive underground cells of World War II, the Thorn Circle. This documentary traces the forgotten story of an eclectic group of resistance fighters who operated in the shadowy no-man's land between Nazi-occupied Poland and the Soviet frontier. The Thorn Circle was made up of Jews, Ukrainians, Poles, and Armenians, people who otherwise might never have spoken, let alone fought together. At its heart was a linguist named Dr. Oksana Lutz, a Jewish philologist who turned her talents for dialects and speech into a tool for espionage and survival. Lutz, who had studied under a student of Saussure in Prague, had anticipated the cultural erasure that would follow Nazi occupation. Her initial idea had been to record voices, stories, lullabies, and political commentary from people across the occupied region, an archive of resistance not just in arms, but in memory. When the Nazis arrived in Lviv in 1941, she went underground and retooled her recording equipment to document the operations of the Thorn Circle instead. The wax cylinders revealed a world once thought lost, coded meeting minutes, whispered farewell messages to children hidden in Catholic orphanages, resistance propaganda rehearsals, even the audio blueprint of a successful assassination attempt against SS Major Klaus Rieker, one of the architects of Operation Reinhard. One recording captured the sharpening of knives over hushed prayers, another the recitation of a forged German officer's speech by a resistance actor learning his lines. It was an audio mosaic of war, fear, and defiance. Central to the story was Anka Lewandowski, a teenage housemaid turned courier. In the journals, and through her voice captured on tape, Anka described how she gained employment at the Gestapo administrative office in Lviv, sweeping floors and delivering coffee. What her superiors never knew was that she carried microfilms strapped beneath her corset, smuggled in classified orders to her comrades, and once swapped a key set of documents destined for Berlin with forgeries. Her voice was clear, tinged with nerves but confident. "They don't see me. That's what saves me. I'm the floor. I'm the broom. I'm the tea girl. They tell each other everything while I polish their boots." Her most daring operation involved forging orders that rerouted a train of captured Polish academics, originally destined for Auschwitz, to a small work camp where sympathizers helped smuggle them out. 17 lives were saved. That night, Anka's voice on tape was solemn. "I don't believe in saints. I only believe in hands. These two," she says, holding up her own, "can kill or heal. That's the truth of this war." But the Thorn Circle was not only brave, it was hunted. In March 1943, following the betrayal of a sympathizer under torture, the Gestapo raided the cell's safehouse. 4 members were shot in the street. Dr. Lutz and Anka fled into the sewers, taking the wax recordings with them. They remained in hiding for months, aided by an Armenian priest who concealed them beneath the floor of a ruined church. It was there, according to the journal, that they made their final recording, a whispered goodbye. The tape ends with a lullaby, half in Polish, half in Yiddish. The voice falters, and silence falls. That was the last anyone heard of them. Post-war records show no trace of Dr. Oksana Lutz or Anka Lewandowski. Their names do not appear in Soviet documentation or Allied reports. Some believed they fled west under assumed identities. Others say they were caught in Stalin's post-war purges. The 1996 discovery of the tapes led to an international effort to preserve the recordings. Linguists at the University of Warsaw and historians from Yad Vashem worked together to digitize and translate the fragments. UNESCO declared the archive a cultural heritage treasure in 2003. What makes the Thorn Circle so haunting is not merely their courage, but the way their story defies the categories imposed by wartime ideologies. They were not aligned with the Soviets, nor loyal to the Polish government in exile. They resisted the Nazis, but also mistrusted the partisans aligned with Moscow. They were a self-contained world, a coalition of necessity, made of people who knew they had nowhere else to stand. A former Soviet archivist, interviewed anonymously for the documentary, stated, "The Thorn Circle scared everyone, not because they were terrorists, but because they told the truth. Not the propaganda truth, the human one. That made them dangerous." Today, visitors to the Lviv Museum of Wartime Resistance can listen to the cleaned recordings. One exhibit lets guests hear Anka's briefing on infiltrating a Gestapo office, complete with her dry humor, "Pretend to be small. Mice don't get stomped if they dance between boots." Another features a reconstructed wax cylinder phonograph playing Dr. Lutz's monologue on linguistic survival. "Erase a people's stories, and you erase them. Words are not just weapons. They are blood." These voices, long buried behind a wall, now echo louder than ever. Though no graves have been found, and no official medals granted, the Thorn Circle lives on in voice. And as long as someone listens, they have not truly vanished. The cold Mojave wind cuts through the Sierra Nevada foothills, where the barbed wire of the Manzanar War Relocation Center once outlined a patch of dusty earth turned into prison. More than 10,000 Japanese Americans were forced to live here between 1942 and 1945. But hidden within that wound in American history is a story few ever knew. A tale of war, espionage, and a young man named Kenji Sakamoto, who served a country that caged his family. Kenji was 17 when Executive Order 9066 uprooted his life in San Francisco. A quiet, wiry teenager with a knack for languages, he was one of those students who sat at the back of class, sketching elaborate code alphabets in his notebooks. His father, a gardener and amateur radio enthusiast, taught Kenji Morse code before he taught him how to shave. By the time the FBI knocked on their door, confiscating radios and cameras and labeling his father an enemy alien, Kenji could already translate Japanese military broadcasts picked up on an old shortwave set. In Manzanar, Kenji kept his head down. He swept floors in the school barracks by day, and by night, he continued practicing his Japanese and listening to war news on a smuggled radio. He had no interest in the government that had taken his family's freedom, until the day the OSS came calling. The Office of Strategic Services, desperate for fluent Japanese speakers, had launched a secret recruitment program inside internment camps. They needed linguists, translators, and, most of all, men who could blend in behind enemy lines. A recruiter named Lieutenant Miles Forster arrived under the guise of a language aptitude assessment, but he was really hunting for field agents. Kenji was one of 6 selected from Manzanar. He was told he would be given a new identity, immediate release, and full pardon for his family, if he agreed to serve. Kenji hesitated. His mother, a widow by then, clutched his hands and whispered, "Make them see you as more than a shadow." He left the next morning under cover of night, officially listed as transferred for educational purposes. Training was brutal. At Camp Savage in Minnesota, he learned jungle survival, unarmed combat, and cryptographic analysis. Then came the final test, identity reconstruction. Kenji was assigned the alias Hiroshi Tanaka, born in Tokyo, raised in Osaka. A backstory was crafted down to the color of his childhood dog's fur. In the spring of 1944, he was dropped into Burma alongside the famed Merrill's Marauders as a civilian interpreter. His job, intercept and decode Japanese signals, interrogate prisoners, and report on troop movements. The OSS made one mistake: they underestimated his intelligence. Kenji wasn't content with translating field notes. He began slipping beyond the wire, using his cover to walk among Japanese-held villages. He sent back detailed sketches of enemy installations, troop rosters, and maps hand-drawn in charcoal. In one daring act, he snuck into a command tent during a skirmish and photographed battle orders that saved a division of U.S. troops from ambush. His American teammates called him Ghost because he seemed to vanish and reappear at will. But the Japanese dubbed him something else once they caught wind of his actions: Yurei no Kodomo, the child ghost. In July 1945, Kenji intercepted a message detailing a possible evacuation route for high-ranking Japanese officers from Rangoon. The message used a cipher he'd only seen once, back in Manzanar, when his father had intercepted similar traffic in 1941. It was from a secret faction loyal to Emperor Hirohito but unaffiliated with the main military command. Kenji's report on it was sent to OSS headquarters. 3 weeks later, the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. Kenji never forgave himself. His uncle's family, he would later learn, had lived just outside the blast radius. They were vaporized. The war ended weeks later. Kenji returned to California under a false name, unable to contact his mother or reveal his real identity. The OSS had made no arrangements for his protection or recognition. The official records of his service were buried in classified files for over 40 years. By the time he reunited with his mother, she was living in a boarding house in Los Angeles, half-blind and nearly mute from years of grief. She touched his face and simply said, "Still a shadow." Kenji never spoke of the war publicly. He worked as a librarian, surrounded by books on Asian history and military theory. But in 1987, during a congressional hearing on reparations for Japanese-American internees, Kenji submitted a sealed envelope to Senator Daniel Inouye. Inside were copies of his wartime sketches, a fragment of a coded Japanese message he had decrypted, and a photograph, faded and grainy, of himself in OSS uniform holding a captured samurai sword. The envelope also contained a letter, now housed in the Library of Congress, that read, "I fought for a country that erased my name, then asked me to save it. I did both. But I never stopped being an enemy in someone's eyes. Let this letter be the proof that loyalty is not skin deep. It is choice. Mine was made in the shadows." Kenji Sakamoto died in 1993. He was 68. His name was never listed among OSS veterans. His medals, awarded in secret, remain in a government archive. But in 2010, a memorial plaque was added to the Manzanar historic site. It reads, "In honor of those who served, even when caged, and one who became a ghost to fight a war not his own." Now, when the wind sweeps through the empty barracks and whistles through the barbed wire fence, some say you can hear whispered Japanese, like a memory carried on desert air. Maybe it's the wind. Or maybe it's Kenji, Still watching, still listening. At the edge of the Black Forest in western Germany once stood the town of Waldburg, a quiet, cobblestone village surrounded by pine groves and whispering trails. Today, it is marked only by a crumbling stone well and a fading road sign twisted by fire. There are no graves, no ruins, no survivors. Official Nazi documents list it as a relocated site. Allied records mark it as accidentally destroyed during an air raid. But satellite imagery and a declassified British intelligence dossier unearthed in 2011 tell a different story. Waldburg vanished because of what was beneath it, a secret V-2 rocket installation buried in the belly of the Earth. Construction began in the summer of 1943. Under the code name Unterwerk Schwarz, the Nazi regime commandeered the village of Waldburg, expelling its 312 residents under threat of strategic security. In their place arrived over 1,000 forced laborers, prisoners from Poland, France, and the Soviet Union, dragged in chains from Dachau and Natzweiler-Struthof, sent to dig tunnels and assemble engines for Hitler's vengeance weapon. The V-2 rocket, the world's first long-range guided ballistic missile, was Wernher von Braun's triumph, and his shame. Designed to strike Allied cities from across the continent, it required secure, remote production sites to shield its delicate guidance systems from bombing raids. Waldburg, nestled in a forest valley and far from rail lines, was chosen for secrecy. Locals rumored strange echoes in the night, thuds beneath the ground, and fires that smoked through the trees for days. Survivors from nearby towns recalled hearing screams in the early morning, cut off abruptly, like a door slammed shut. The facility was built vertically, descending into the ground. 7 levels. Storage. Engine assembly. Fueling bays. Launch calibration. Records unearthed later by British intelligence describe an eerie layout, workstations carved from raw rock, faintly illuminated by electric bulbs powered by diesel engines. Each laborer was assigned a number and a color-coded patch. Escape was impossible. The tunnels were rigged with charges. One of the most chilling documents recovered post-war is the Schnecht Report, authored by an SS engineer named Anton Schnecht, who supervised rocket alignment. In a matter-of-fact tone, he wrote, "Worker attrition averages 12 per day. Morale irrelevant. Efficiency prioritized over sanitation. Gas-fed engine cooling system improved, tested on prisoners. Exposure limit before lung collapse, 47 minutes." Among the forced laborers was a Polish mechanic named Janek Zolwinski. His name was found in a diary kept by a French prisoner, Jules Farad, who smuggled notes out by hiding them in the seams of his boot. The diary, discovered in 2002 in a Lyon attic, details a daring act of sabotage. Zolwinski, under the guise of fatigue, had deliberately misaligned the fuel intake on AV-2 scheduled for launch toward London. When the rocket was tested from a site outside Kassel, it exploded on the pad, killing 5 engineers. Zolwinski was executed. The next day, 20 others were hanged in retaliation. In late February 1945, the Allies began intensifying reconnaissance over western Germany. Royal Air Force aerial photos revealed heat signatures inconsistent with natural terrain near Waldburg. On March 4, under orders from the Air Ministry, 47 Lancasters were dispatched for a precision bombing raid. They never made it. Halfway through the mission, false weather reports redirected the formation east. Hours later, Waldburg exploded from within. It wasn't bombs that destroyed the town, it was the installation itself. British cryptanalysts intercepted a scrambled message from Berlin. Erzwungene detonation. Schwarz is compromised. Execute final order. The final order, as pieced together from later testimony during the Nuremberg trials, was known as Vergessenstellung, the forgetting protocol. Hitler's high command, realizing the war was lost, had given certain SS units standing orders to erase the most sensitive locations if Allied forces got too close. Waldburg, with its underground laboratories, slave labor atrocities, and unrecoverable scientific data, was deemed too dangerous to fall into enemy hands. Eyewitnesses from neighboring villages spoke of tremors shaking the mountains, a red glow searing the sky, and ash falling like snow. A shepherd boy, now an old man, recalled seeing trees burning upside down, their roots blown skyward. The blast radius stretched nearly 2 kilometers. What wasn't destroyed in the initial detonation was swallowed by fire. When Allied troops reached the site 2 weeks later, they found scorched rock, glassy craters, and fragments of V-2 tail fins melted into the soil. No bodies. No buildings. No bunker entrances. The area was deemed unstable and sealed off. A handful of British officers were assigned to comb the ruins, among them a young intelligence analyst named Captain Sylvia Nash. Her field notes, discovered decades later in a private estate in Kent, include a chilling entry. No survivors. No evidence of habitation, yet the land feels haunted. We found a child's boot, perfectly preserved in ash, and a half-melted watch still ticking. Someone knew how to cover their tracks. The survivors of Waldberg, those expelled before construction, were never permitted to return. Many resettled under false names, fearing SS retaliation. When the war ended, Waldberg was omitted from Allied briefings, its memory erased as efficiently as its physical form. The site remained closed to the public until the reunification of Germany. In 1999, a forestry survey team detected unusually symmetrical patterns beneath the earth. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed vast chambers, some collapsed, others still intact. The German government, under pressure from international historians, commissioned a limited excavation. Inside one chamber, they found skeletal remains bound in rusted manacles. In another, a V-2 fuel chamber, cracked but intact, leaking frozen residue that crystallized on contact with air. A scorched steel plaque read only, Fr. Das Reich, 1944. To this day, the Waldberg site is closed off, patrolled by Bundeswehr security and fenced with warnings about toxic soil. No memorial marks the location. There are whispers of unexploded warheads, and of research notes spirited away by American and Soviet agents under Operation Paperclip. But the town, and the people who once lived, labored, and died beneath it, remain ghosts. A single tree grows at the center of the blast zone, a twisted pine with blackened bark. Locals call it Der letzte Zeuge, the last witness. Beneath its roots, perhaps, still lie the truths that fire tried to bury. In the early morning hours of June 6, 1944, over 150,000 Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy in the largest amphibious assault in history. But what is less known is that hundreds of miles away, in fields near Calais and empty roads in Pas-de-Calais, the Germans were watching a different invasion unfold, one that never came. Inflatable tanks. Pre-recorded radio chatter. Phantom divisions. This was the work of Ghost Company 9, a secret unit of illusionists, sound engineers, and artists who helped win D-Day without ever firing a shot. Formally designated as the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, the unit was better known by its nickname, the Ghost Army. But within that larger deception corps existed an elite experimental detachment, Ghost Company 9, tasked with the most critical diversion of Operation Fortitude, convincing the Germans that the Allied invasion would strike not Normandy, but Calais. They were actors in the deadliest play in history. The company was led by Captain Douglas Brent, a former set designer from Broadway who had built everything from Egyptian temples to futuristic cities on stage. Brent understood spectacle. He also understood the human eye, and how easy it was to trick. His team included radio technicians, prop builders, and a sound engineer named Marcus Sable, who had worked on Hollywood war films before enlisting. Their mission: create an army that didn't exist. The deception began months earlier with Operation Quicksilver, which involved fake radio traffic, double agents feeding misinformation to the Abwehr, and controlled leaks from high-level Allied command. Ghost Company 9 was the final act, the visible illusion. In May 1944, they were deployed to the English countryside, where they began assembling their divisions. Inflatable Shermans, crafted from thick rubber and painted with mud and battle damage, were positioned by hand at dawn and dusk to avoid aerial detection. Trucks carried giant loudspeakers rigged to broadcast the soundscape of a moving army. Shouting officers, rumbling engines, metallic clanks, and even profanity-laced banter. Marcus Sable's team spent weeks recording actual combat units. Every detail mattered. In one tape labeled, Company B, Wet Ground Movement, the sound of sloshing boots and sputtering engines was adjusted by hand to reflect muddy terrain. Another was looped with coughing soldiers to simulate a flu outbreak, a trick to confuse enemy surveillance with false morale reports. The piece de resistance was the landing rehearsal. On June 1st, German reconnaissance planes photographed what appeared to be hundreds of landing craft stationed along the southeastern coast of England. They were wooden silhouettes, painted with shadows and shaped with forced perspective. Nearby, fake tire tracks led to supply depots that didn't exist. German High Command, already misled by double agents like Garbo, took the bait. On the eve of D-Day, while Allied troops quietly mobilized toward Normandy, Ghost Company 9 ramped up the illusion. Radio signals blasted coordinated invasion chatter, complete with coded references to fake regiments. The 6th Armored, the 4th Cavalry, even a fabricated airborne brigade of Manchester. Brent himself voiced one of the commanders, barking nonsense orders in a clipped Scottish accent. Meanwhile, in Normandy, German defenses waited for reinforcements that would never arrive, because they were looking the wrong way. 4:48 critical hours after the first wave hit the beaches, Hitler's reserve panzer divisions remained stalled near Calais. Convinced that Normandy was a feint, the German High Command refused to redeploy. This delay gave the Allies time to establish their beachheads and bring in heavy armor. The success of the illusion came at a cost. On June 7th, Luftwaffe bombers caught sight of Ghost Company 9's decoy vehicles and launched a nighttime attack. The explosions tore through the field. 2 operators were killed, Private Howard Klein and Sergeant Leo Marichal, while trying to reposition an inflatable half-track. Their bodies were buried in unmarked graves near a nearby stream, their deaths classified for decades under operational secrecy. Captain Brent, in a rare moment of anger, wrote in his private notebook, "They died pretending to be soldiers, and maybe that's the bitterest truth. But we were all pretending. And somehow, it worked." After the war, most of Ghost Company 9's members returned to civilian life. Brent went back to Broadway. Sable became a sound editor in Hollywood, winning awards under a different name. Their contributions were kept secret under the Official Secrets Act until 1996, when declassified files revealed the scope of their work. In those dusty files were photos of men posing beside inflatable tanks with cigarettes in their mouths, grinning like circus performers. There were schematics of sound rigs, diagrams for mobile illusion panels, and fake orders typed on weathered paper. One memo from Eisenhower's staff simply read, "Operation Fortitude, continue stage direction." A documentary crew later interviewed Marcus Sable, then in his 80s, who summed up their role with dry wit, "We fooled the Nazis with hot air and Hollywood. Not bad for a bunch of guys who couldn't shoot straight." Today, a quiet memorial stone in Kent marks the field where the illusions were staged. It bears no military insignia, just a line from Shakespeare. "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players." Ghost Company may 9th not have stormed the beaches, but without their war of whispers and shadows, D-Day might have ended in disaster. Their weapons were rubber, tape, and lies, but they fought with purpose. And in the theater of war, their act was among the most brilliant ever performed. What's buried beneath Waldberg still pulses with secrets, chambers sealed in ash, knowledge erased in fire. The forest tries to grow over it, but the past doesn't stay buried. Not when it was built on bones, hidden under lies, and sealed by silence. Walk too close, listen too long, and you might hear it. The hum of vengeance weapons, or the cries of those forgotten by history, but not by the ground that swallowed them.